The first time the orc commander entered the forge, the blacksmith did not think of her as a woman at all, only as weight and presence, and the sudden awareness that the doorway had been built without anyone like her in mind. She ducked as she stepped inside, armor scarred and polished by use, tusks catching the forge light like ivory warmed by fire. Without a word, she laid a sword across his workbench, the steel ringing softly against the wood as if announcing itself. The blacksmith glanced down out of habit, fingers already reaching for the blade, and what he saw puzzled him. The edge was worn, yes, but evenly. Not chipped, not cracked, not abused. It was the kind of wear that came from controlled strikes, from practice rather than desperation. "It needs work," she said before he could speak, her voice calm, measured, almost careful. He turned the sword slowly, watching the light travel along its length, listening to the faint hum beneath the metal that told him the steel was good. Too good, in fact. "It's still sound," he replied, not looking up. Whoever forged this knew what they were doing. There was a pause behind him, heavy but patient. "It doesn't feel right," she said. He frowned, because steel always felt right or wrong for a reason, and this one felt obedient, balanced, honest. Still, customers define their own needs, and so he nodded and told her when to return. She did not leave immediately. Instead, she stood where she was, watching him set the blade aside, watching him stoke the fire, watching the rhythm of his movements with an attention that felt deliberate rather than curious. He noticed it only as a mild discomfort, like being examined for flaws he could not see. When she finally turned to go, he realized he had never asked her name, and for reasons he did not understand, the omission bothered him more than it should have. She returned the next week with a spear bearing a shallow bend near the head, again too precise to be accidental, again something that could be corrected in an hour. He repaired it. She stayed, and when the work was done she asked him how long he had been forging steel. The question surprised him. People asked about prices, deadlines, materials. They did not usually ask about years. He answered anyway, because it felt easier than wondering why she wanted to know. She nodded as if filing the information away, as if it mattered. Over the following weeks, she came again and again, each time with a weapon that carried just enough damage to justify her presence, each time staying longer than necessary, her attention never drifting. He told himself she was particular, that warriors trusted consistency, that commanders valued familiarity. He told himself many sensible things. What he did not tell himself was that her visits followed no strategic logic, that she bypassed other forges closer to her patrol routes, that the steel she brought him was always broken just enough to need him. To her, every blade laid on his bench was an invitation shaped in the only language she trusted. Steel did not lie. Steel revealed intention through stress and care, through where it failed and where it endured. She believed that if she placed her weapons in his hands often enough, if she stood in his forge long enough, he would eventually read what she was offering. To him, it was work, routine, honest labor. He did not see the courage it took for a warrior to return again and again without drawing a blade, to stand unarmed in a space that was not hers and hope. When she left each time, she did so without disappointment on her face, carrying patience like a shield. And when the blacksmith watched her go, returning to the familiar comfort of heat and hammer and ringing steel, he never once considered that he had just been courted. By the time the blacksmith realized the orc commander had become part of his routine, she had already been part of it for months. Her visits arrived without warning but never felt intrusive, as if the forge itself had learned to make room for her. Some days, she brought a weapon, a sword with its edge dulled too evenly, a hammer whose haft had been stressed just enough to loosen the head. Other days, she brought nothing at all. On those days, she would stand near the wall, arms folded, watching him work as sparks leapt and steel sang beneath his hammer. She did not interrupt. She did not rush him. She waited, and waiting, to her, meant something sacred. He mistook it for discipline. When she spoke, her questions circled him rather than the metal. Did he ever leave Thornhaven? Did he enjoy the quiet? Did he sleep well above the forge, with the heat rising through the floorboards? The questions unsettled him in a way he could not articulate, because they implied an interest that had nothing to do with steel. He answered honestly but briefly, returning to his work as if rhythm could shield him from meaning. To her, these answers were openings. To him, They were just words exchanged to fill silence. In her culture, to linger unarmed in someone's workspace was an act of trust. To offer a weapon, especially one intentionally weakened, was to say, "I place my safety in your hands." She believed that if she repeated this act often enough, he would understand the gravity of it. But the blacksmith spoke a different language, one shaped by contracts and cause and effect, where tools were tools and damage demanded explanation. He saw only coincidence where she saw commitment. He noticed that she watched his hands closely, the way his grip softened when shaping finer pieces, the way he tilted his head to listen to metal instead of looking at it. He assumed curiosity. He did not see admiration. He did not see how her posture shifted when he laughed, how her shoulders eased when he acknowledged her presence with more than a nod. There were moments, brief, dangerous ones, when something almost broke through his certainty. When he finished a repair and expected her to leave, and she stayed. When she asked whether he ever felt lonely, and he felt the question land too close to something he kept buried. When he noticed that she always positioned herself where he would look up and see her without having to turn. Each time, he dismissed the discomfort as fatigue or distraction, unaware that she was slowly exhausting the courage it took to keep trying. Around them, others began to understand. Townsfolk exchanged knowing glances. A guard once joked that the commander spent more time in the forge than at headquarters. Even among her own warriors, whispers spread, quiet acknowledgments that their commander had chosen a human craftsman and was courting him with restraint rather than force. She ignored them all, because patience was a form of strength, and she had survived worse than waiting. The blacksmith, for his part, remained steadfastly blind. He believed that if something mattered, it would announce itself clearly, like a cracked blade or a snapped haft. He did not yet understand that love, especially when offered carefully, rarely made noise. It waited. It lingered. It spoke in steel placed gently on a workbench and in hours spent standing silently beside a fire. And as the months passed, the space between what she was saying and what he was hearing grew wider, filled with words neither of them knew how to translate. The first gift appeared without explanation, and because it came quietly, the blacksmith treated it as nothing more than an odd courtesy. He found it resting on the edge of his workbench one morning before the fire was fully lit. A small charm carved from bone, shaped like a wolf caught mid-step, alert and watchful. The craftsmanship was careful, intimate, the sort of work that required patience and intention rather than strength. He turned it over in his fingers, puzzled, then set it aside, assuming one of his visitors had left it behind. When the orc commander arrived later that day with a spear bearing a slight warp near the head, he held the charm up and asked if it was hers. She studied it for a moment, then nodded. "For you," she said, and after a pause, added, "A token." He thanked her, a little embarrassed by the attention, and placed it on a shelf near his father's old tools, where half-forgotten objects went to wait for meaning. She watched him do it, her expression unreadable, and said nothing. More gifts followed, each one small, each one precise. A pouch of dried leaves that smelled of pine and something sharp and clean, offered as payment for a repair that had taken less than an hour. A strip of leather stamped with markings he did not recognize, left folded neatly beside the anvil. A vial of oil rare enough that he recognized its value immediately, though he had no idea how she had obtained it. Each time, she framed the offering as excess, as tradition, as nothing worth remarking on. Each time, he accepted it politely and stored it away, commenting on craftsmanship rather than purpose, admiring technique while missing intent. In her culture, gifts were not decorations. They were declarations of protection, of warmth, of belonging. They were meant to be carried, worn, used, made visible. His habit of shelving them felt to her like silence. The imbalance grew without either of them naming it. She stayed longer after each repair, sometimes sitting near the hearth with her armor unbuckled, her weapons set aside. She spoke more about her patrols, the long stretches of border where nothing moved but wind and memory, the weight of command that never quite lifted. He listened, nodded, offered practical comments, never once sharing anything that felt equally exposed. When she asked whether anyone waited for him at night, he laughed awkwardly and said the forge did not leave much room for such things. She absorbed the answer quietly, as if adding it to a ledger only she could see. The gifts became more personal. One evening, after he repaired a short sword that had never truly been damaged, she placed a leather bracelet on his workbench, wide and carefully stitched, the edges burnished smooth, a clan symbol pressed deep into the hide. "Payment," she said, voice steady. He picked it up, impressed despite himself, turning it over and tracing the workmanship. "You made this?" She nodded. "It took time." He smiled, genuine and warm. "It's excellent work." Then, without thinking, he set it on the shelf with the others and returned to his tools. The fire crackled softly. The moment passed. She did not reach for the bracelet. She did not correct him. She simply stood there, patience held together by will alone, while another unspoken offering joined the quiet collection of words he did not know how to read. The blade was different from the others from the moment the blacksmith touched it. It was longer than most swords he worked on, narrower, balanced in a way that felt intentional rather than practical, as if it had been shaped for hands that would never swing it in battle. The orc commander set it on the workbench with care, her movements slower than usual, almost reverent. "This one isn't broken," she said before he could ask. "I want it finished." He frowned, turning the blade in the firelight, noting the quality of the steel, the unfinished guard, the bare tang waiting for a grip. It was excellent work already, better than anything she had brought him before. "Who forged this?" he asked. "I did," she replied, and the admission carried more weight than he understood. He nodded, impressed, launching into technical observations about balance and temper and how the fuller could be refined. She listened, but her eyes never left his face, watching not the blade but the way his hands moved, the way he spoke when absorbed in something he loved. Over the next days, she returned repeatedly, not with damage to correct, but with questions about finish and engraving, about grip material and weight distribution, about whether a blade could be shaped to feel like it belonged to a single person rather than any warrior. He answered eagerly, missing the way each question circled closer to him. When he asked who the blade was for, she hesitated just long enough for the truth to flicker between them, then said, "Someone who won't use it." He laughed softly, assuming it was a joke he didn't quite get, and suggested a ceremonial finish, something elegant rather than aggressive. She agreed too quickly. He worked on it with unusual care, choosing patterns that flowed rather than cut, engraving lines that echoed the rhythm of his own hammer strokes, shaping the grip to fit hands he unconsciously measured against his own. When it was finished, the blade gleamed softly, beautiful and restrained, a weapon that felt like a promise rather than a threat. He presented it to her with professional pride, explaining every choice, every refinement, never once asking why a commander would want such a thing. She took it in both hands, testing the balance, then held it still, eyes lowered, breath unsteady for the first time since he had known her. "It suits you," she said quietly. The word startled him. "Me?" He laughed, awkward. "I wouldn't know what to do with it." She looked up then, something fragile and resolute in her gaze. "You wouldn't have to," she said. For a moment, the forge seemed to narrow, the air thick with something unspoken. This was the moment, the one she had been building toward with broken weapons and patient visits and gifts left without explanation. The blade was not meant to be used. It was meant to be kept, a symbol of trust forged by her hands and finished by his, a vow offered without words. He felt the weight of it, sensed that something important hovered just out of reach, and did what he always did when faced with uncertainty. He retreated into practicality. "It's excellent steel," he said. "You should carry it yourself." The hope in her eyes faltered, not shattered but bent, like metal stressed just past its limit. She nodded once, accepting the answer she had not wanted. "Then I'll keep it," she said. She did not leave it with him. She did not explain. She turned and walked out of the forge carrying the blade she had meant for him, leaving behind the quiet certainty that this had been her most vulnerable attempt yet, and that something precious had just passed through his hands without him ever realizing what it was. The warnings came the way most truths do when someone is not ready to hear them, sideways, wrapped in humor or irritation or casual observation, easy to dismiss if you wanted to. The blacksmith wanted to. After the blade she forged left his forge in her hands instead of his, something in the air shifted, a tension he could feel but refused to name. She still came, but less often, and when she did, she no longer lingered without reason. Her visits had edges now. She brought fewer weapons, spoke less, stood farther from the fire. He told himself this was normal, that commanders grew busy, that border tensions rose and fell. It was easier than admitting he missed the way she used to stay even when there was nothing left to fix. Old Merrick noticed the change immediately. One afternoon, while delivering coal, the old man watched the blacksmith work in silence for a long time before clicking his tongue in that irritating way of his. "You turned her down," he said flatly. The blacksmith stiffened. "I didn't turn anyone down." Merrick snorted. "That's worse." When pressed, the old man only shook his head and muttered about fools who understood iron better than people, leaving the words hanging like smoke. The baker's daughter was less restrained. She cornered the blacksmith outside the forge one evening and asked him outright why he hadn't taken the blade. "What blade?" he asked, genuinely confused. She stared at him like he'd admitted he couldn't see color. "The one she made for you," she said. "Everyone knows that was for you." He laughed it off, heat rising in his face. "That's ridiculous. She's a commander." It was ceremonial. The girl crossed her arms. "You don't make something like that for ceremony." He walked away before she could say more. Even among the orcs, the shift did not go unnoticed. A younger warrior waiting near the forge once asked quietly whether the blacksmith had refused a bond offering. The question startled him so badly he nearly dropped his hammer. "No," he said too quickly. "Nothing like that happened." The warrior's expression softened into something like pity. "If you say so," she replied, and did not elaborate. Each warning slid past him, deflected by logic and habit. He told himself that if the commander wanted something from him, she would say it plainly. He told himself that warriors were direct, that strength meant clarity. He did not consider how much strength it took for her to keep coming without ever demanding an answer. When she did appear, she spoke only of patrols and repairs, never of gifts, never of blades meant for keeping rather than using. He noticed, dimly, that she no longer asked about his life. The questions had stopped. The watching had changed. Where there had once been patience, there was now restraint, carefully controlled, like a grip tightened just enough to keep from shaking. One evening, after repairing a minor crack in an axe head that had clearly been stressed on purpose, he handed it back and made a casual comment about how it might last longer if she stopped testing its limits. She looked at him for a long moment, eyes unreadable, then said, "Limits exist to be learned," and left without another word. The forge felt colder after that. Still, he did nothing. He returned to routine, to reason, to the comfortable belief that if something truly mattered, it would demand to be seen. He did not realize that he was mistaking restraint for indifference, or that every ignored warning was another moment she counted as patience spent. By the time the warnings stopped altogether, he would finally understand what they had been trying to save him from. But by then, the steel would already be cooling, and the chance to reshape it would be gone. She came without steel that day, and the absence struck him harder than any broken blade ever had. The forge was loud with its usual sounds, fire breathing, hammer ringing. But when he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway with empty hands, the noise felt suddenly wrong, like a song missing its final note. She did not step fully inside. She stood at the threshold, armor fastened, posture perfect, the picture of a commander who had already made a decision. He waited for her to set something on the bench. She didn't. "Nothing to fix?" he asked, trying for lightness and failing. She shook her head once. "I came to see if you would ask." The words were quiet, carefully controlled, and for a moment he thought he must have misheard them. "Ask what?" he said, frowning. The silence stretched. The fire popped. Somewhere outside, a cart rattled over stone. She took one step in, then stopped again, as if crossing that last distance required permission he had not given. "Anything," she said. "Why I came so often. Why I stayed. Why I stopped asking questions." The truth hovered between them, fragile and dangerous. He felt it, felt the pressure of it like overheated steel, and instinctively reached for the only tools he trusted: deflection and reason. "You don't need to explain yourself," he said. "You're always welcome here." Her jaw tightened. "That's not the same," she replied. "I needed to know if you saw me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words he needed were there, somewhere, but they did not assemble themselves into certainty. He understood now, dimly, what she had been offering, but understanding did not arrive with courage. He was afraid of answering wrong, afraid of choosing something he did not fully comprehend. "I don't want to assume," he said at last. The sentence sounded responsible. It sounded safe. It sounded like nothing at all. The hope in her eyes did not shatter. It settled, heavy and final, like ash. She nodded once, a commander acknowledging an order. Then I won't ask again, she said. She reached into her cloak and placed something small on the edge of the workbench. A simple strip of leather, worn smooth, not new, not ceremonial. For the repairs you've done, she added, though they both knew it was not payment. He picked it up automatically, intending to thank her, intending to say something more, but she had already turned away. At the door, she paused, not to look back, not to hesitate, just long enough to say, "Steel holds when it's tempered in time." Then she was gone. The forge swallowed the quiet she left behind, but it did not erase it. He stood there for a long time, leather warm in his palm, feeling as though he had just watched something precious cool beyond working heat. That night, the fire burned low and refused to comfort him. The shelf of gifts seemed heavier than usual. He told himself she would return. She always did. He told himself he would be ready next time. But the next morning came without her shadow crossing the doorway, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Only then did he begin to understand that this had not been a pause. It had been an ending. The forge did not change its habits when she stopped coming, but the blacksmith did, and that difference echoed louder than any hammer strike. He lit the fire at the same hour, shoveled coal with the same practiced motions, and brought iron to heat with the same patience he always had. Yet every sound felt wrong, as if the forge were answering a question no one asked anymore. Days passed without the heavy shadow in the doorway, without the careful pause before a weapon was set on the bench, without the quiet certainty of her presence settling the air. He told himself it was coincidence at first, that patrols ran long and borders grew tense, that commanders did not arrange their lives around forges. But as the days stretched into weeks, the absence became a shape he could no longer step around. He caught himself looking up at every footstep outside, heart lifting and then dropping when the sound moved on. At night, the room above the forge felt larger, the quiet more insistent, the heat less comforting. He began to replay their last meeting in relentless detail. The empty hands, the question he had failed to answer, the way her voice had held steady even as something inside her had settled into finality. Old Merrick noticed first, as he always did. The old man stood watching one afternoon while the blacksmith struck steel harder than necessary, sparks flying wild. "Click, click, click," he muttered. "You're listening for someone who isn't coming back." The blacksmith bristled. "She's busy," he said too quickly. Merrick snorted. "Busy doesn't sound like goodbye." The words lodged deep, impossible to dislodge. Rumors drifted in with travelers and guards. Border skirmishes, long patrols, a commander taking assignments meant for whole squads. Reckless work, they said. Necessary work, they said. The blacksmith's stomach tightened at every mention, though he pretended not to care. He found himself drawn to the shelf without quite deciding to go there, touching each item as if taking inventory of a language he had refused to learn. The wolf charm felt heavier now, its watchful posture accusatory. The tea pouch still smelled of pine, unopened, waiting. The bracelet lay where he had placed it, leather darkened by time, the clan symbol worn smooth. He picked it up and, without ceremony, slid it onto his wrist. It fit as if it had always belonged there. The simple fact of it broke something open in him. That night, sleep refused him. He lay staring at the ceiling, the forge's daytime sounds replaying in his head, now threaded with silences he finally recognized. The way she had waited, the way she had never demanded, the way she had placed her safety, her weapons, her time, her unguarded presence, into his hands and trusted him to read what he had chosen to ignore. Understanding arrived not as a revelation, but as a weight, settling into his chest until breathing felt like work. He realized, with a clarity that hurt, that the steel had never been the message. The message had been constancy, choice, courage offered quietly, again and again, without spectacle. He understood, too, that his answer had not been caution or respect or professionalism. It had been fear, fear of choosing before certainty, fear of stepping beyond the narrow, reliable world he knew. When dawn came, gray and unforgiving, he stood in the empty forge and admitted the truth he could no longer avoid. She had courted him with steel, and when it mattered most, he had answered with silence. Understanding did not come like revelation or relief. It came like regret, slow, heavy, unavoidable. It settled into the blacksmith's bones as he moved through his days, turning familiar motions into reminders of what he had failed to do. Every time he lifted a hammer, he remembered how she had washed his hands. Every time he quenched steel, he remembered the way she had waited, believing patience would be enough. The forge still sang, but now the sound felt accusatory, each clear ring echoing a question he had never answered. He began to see the past with cruel clarity. The broken blades that had never been truly broken. The gifts he had shelved like curiosities instead of wearing like promises. The blade she had forged for him, meant to be kept, not carried. Walking back out the door because he had been too afraid to accept what it offered. The rumors grew sharper as the weeks passed. Traders spoke of increased tension along the northern routes. Guards mentioned a commander who volunteered for patrols no one else wanted, who pushed her unit harder than necessary, who fought like someone daring the world to test her limits. He listened from the edge of conversations, saying nothing, every word tightening something in his chest. One evening, a young soldier mentioned her name in passing, said she had taken command of an advance post near the border, far from supply lines and help. The blacksmith felt the room tilt, the truth finally landing with full weight. She had not simply left his forge. She had left hope behind. That night, he took everything down from the shelf and laid it out across his workbench. The wolf charm, the tea, the bracelet he now wore, the small strip of leather she had left on her last visit. He touched each one slowly, deliberately, like counting scars. These were not objects. They were attempts, invitations, risks taken quietly by someone who had been brave enough to want him without certainty in return. He understood now why she had spoken through steel. Steel was honest. Steel failed where pressure was applied. Steel showed you exactly how much force it could endure before it broke. She had trusted him to read that language because she believed he already spoke it fluently. And he had, just not where it mattered. Sleep became impossible. He lay awake replaying their final conversation, hearing his own words with new understanding. I don't want to assume. He winced every time. It had sounded careful. It had felt safe. But safety, he realized, was not neutrality. It was a choice he had made to protect himself at the cost of everything else. By the time dawn crept through the high windows, gray and unforgiving, the decision had already taken shape in him. He could not fix this by waiting. He could not mend it with time. Time was the thing he had already wasted. He stood in the center of the forge, listening to its quiet, and understood that staying would be its own answer. Another silence, another missed chance. If he did nothing, the story would end exactly as it was meant to, with steel unbroken and hearts left unattended. He had spent his life believing that things revealed their importance through force or failure. Now he knew better. Some things asked to be chosen before they shattered. Understanding had arrived too late to save what they had been, but not too late to change what came next. He left Thornhaven before dawn, the forge locked behind him for the first time since he had inherited it, the familiar weight of the key cold in his palm. The road felt unreal beneath his feet, each step a quiet rebellion against the life he had chosen for safety. He rode badly, stiff and uncertain, hands blistering on the reins, but he did not slow. Every mile pressed the truth deeper into him, that he was not chasing love, but consequence. He followed rumors like broken signposts, an orc commander reassigned north, a border post reinforced and then abandoned, a patrol that pushed too far and did not all return. With each story, his chest tightened, fear sharpening his resolve. He rehearsed the words he should have spoken months ago, shaping them carefully, like steel brought to working heat. I see you. I understand now. I choose you. The land grew harsher as he traveled, trees thinning, rock rising, the wind carrying the smell of iron and cold water. At a river crossing, a wounded scout told him she had passed through days earlier, leading a small unit, her armor scarred, her expression unreadable. She didn't plan to come back, the scout said quietly, and the blacksmith felt the words settle like lead. He pressed on anyway, because stopping would mean accepting an ending he was not ready to carry. By the time he reached the advance post, the air smelled of smoke and old blood, the silence heavy in a way no forge ever was. A few survivors remained, moving with the stunned efficiency of those who had already grieved. They looked at him with confusion when he asked her name, then with understanding that came too easily. "You're too late," someone said, not unkindly. The world narrowed. He stood there, listening as the story was told in fragments. An ambush at dusk, steel clashing in a narrow pass. Her voice holding the line while others fell back. The decision to stay when retreat was still possible. Courage had carried her forward where patience had finally failed. They said she had fought cleanly, decisively, like someone who knew exactly what she was protecting and no longer feared losing it. He walked to the edge of the pass alone, the wind tearing at his clothes, the ground marked by scars that told a clearer story than any witness could. There, half hidden beneath stone and ash, he found the blade she had forged, the ceremonial one, elegant and restrained, its edge nicked, its surface darkened, but unmistakable. He lifted it with shaking hands, recognizing the balance instantly, recognizing himself in the finishing touches she had asked for under the guise of craft. She had carried it after all, not as a symbol, but as a choice. He sat there for a long time, the blade across his knees, the words he had practiced finally spilling out into the empty air. He said them anyway. He said them all. The wind took them without answer, scattering them down the ravine where they could not reach her. When he finally stood, the sun was low and the shadows long, and the truth was complete and merciless. He had learned the language she spoke fluently, and he had become brave enough to answer, just in time for the answer to mean nothing. He returned to Thornhaven alone, the road stretching longer on the way back as if the land itself refused to let him forget what it had taken. The forge greeted him with familiar smells, coal smoke, oil, hot iron, but none of it felt like home anymore. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and for the first time did not light the fire. The anvil sat cold and patient, waiting for hands that did not yet know what to make. He set the blade she had forged across his workbench, laying it with the same care she had once used with every weapon she brought him. It was scarred now, marked by use and consequence, and he could see exactly where the steel had been stressed beyond reason, where courage had asked more than metal could give. He cleaned it slowly, not to erase the marks but to honor them, polishing around each flaw as if outlining a story. Days passed, then weeks. Customers came and went, remarking on his quiet, on the way he worked without humming now, on how the forge rang with a different note. He answered politely, did his work well, and went upstairs alone each night to a room that felt too large for one life. The shelf of gifts became something else entirely. He took each item down and placed them not as decorations but as keepsakes with intention. The wolf charm near the door, a promise of protection he finally understood. The tea brewed on cold mornings, bitter and grounding. The bracelet worn until the leather softened and took the shape of him. He learned, too late, how to carry what had been given. Sometimes, at dusk, he would sit by the forge window with the blade across his knees, turning it in the fading light, tracing the lines where her hands and his had once met in shared purpose. He did not swing it. He never would. It was not meant for that. It was meant to be kept, a reminder that love asked for courage before certainty, not after. The town moved on, as towns always do. New rumors replaced old ones. Borders shifted. The world found other stories to tell. But the forge kept a memory in its bones. When the hammer rang, it rang clean and true, and when it fell silent, the silence was not empty. It was full of what might have been. He came to understand that some failures were not mistakes of skill but of timing, that some answers lost their power when spoken too late, no matter how true they were. Steel could be reforged if caught at working heat. Hearts cooled faster, and once cooled, no amount of fire could return them to the moment when shaping was possible. On certain nights, when the wind carried the sound of distant water and the stars were sharp enough to hurt, he would whisper the words again, not in hope of being heard, but in recognition of the truth they carried. I see you. I understand. I choose you. The forge listened. The blade listened. Tom did not. And so the story ended not with reconciliation or grand return, but with a man who learned the language of love fluently and spoke it with perfect clarity into a world that had already moved on. Proof that while steel can be mended, sharpened, and made new, time will not bend, and some lessons are paid for in full the moment they are finally understood.